Matt Hoh is a Marine Corps veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq. Matt worked for the State Department, but in 2009 resigned in protest from his post in Afghanistan over American escalation of the war. He is currently the Associate Director, Eisenhower Media Network. He's written for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Counterpunch, CNN, Defense News, The Guardian, Huffington Post, Mother Jones, the Raleigh News and Observer, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, and more. And he's been invited to and spoken at the UN. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt. Take it away, Matt. Thanks.
And happy to talk about, yeah, really anything. But thank you all for having me here with you.
Mike Cacciano. Sorry, should be
Cacciano.
there.
Okay.
Yeah, just two items, actually not related to Ukraine exactly, but you were mentioning you were trying to get some younger people, and my suggestion would be to tie the war in more with climate, because the kids are really into climate. War is not green, and you can approach it so many different ways. Second item, more with Gaza. I just got a letter printed in the paper. It's something I recommend everybody try to do. It's good exercise, and it's free. But my suggestion was for the U.S., which obviously has to save face, like Putin, like anybody else, even Netanyahu's got to save face. Go to the UN Security Council and ask or demand for a regional ceasefire as far as the Mideast goes. I wouldn't try to push it up to the Ukraine area, but hard enough to get this done. But that would give cover to the Iranians, to Hezbollah, and whoever else that, the UN's demanding that we ceasefire, negotiate, and see if that gives a shot to getting us off a war footing. Because this latest thing with all the pages blowing up, and it's like they're trying their best to start World War III. I mean, Netanyahu's got to have it, and if he succeeds, it's not going to be good. And so that was the thing I put out there, that I thought it was a good cover for everybody. They could all hide behind that and say, "Oh yeah, let's have a ceasefire," and then negotiate, maybe get the hostages back, whatever. Basically, get Netanyahu out of office. I mean, he's got this settler crazy regime trying to change their constitution. I mean, I don't think he should be that hard to kick out of office. We've done it before. So, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, with regards to like getting younger people in, some of it I think is just they're just different generations, and maybe they just don't belong to groups the way that our generations belong to groups. I'm in Gen X. I'm 51, so I'm a little bit on the older side for the Iraq and Afghan vets. I think a lot of it is just guys just don't want to talk about it, be involved with it. They want to put it behind them, which is understandable. But I think like the millennial Gen Z, and maybe I'm showing my age and like talking about something I don't know, right? But maybe the idea of being part of a club, being part like a dues paying member, just isn't how it's done now. I thought about this a bunch of years ago in a sense of, why would you join an organization and pay dues to get their newsletter when you can read it for free on Facebook or on Twitter or anything like that, right? So maybe our construct of how we do things is dated. And because the points that were being made earlier about how engaged the younger people, they're the ones who are leading, they're the ones who are standing up to the genocide, right? They're the ones who are leading it. Maybe it's just the way they do things are different than the way we're accustomed to, which is great because that's probably more effective. With regards to this idea of giving cover, yeah, no, it makes total sense. Absolutely, I love it. And then you're confronting with the reality of who we have in power. And a friend of mine, I don't think he's on here. I won't say his name because he didn't give me permission to share the story. But he goes to the UN quite a bit, takes a part in a number of UN meetings and such. And he
and that was it. And then all of a sudden I get this.
Oh, and his he was at a meeting one time. He was at this event at the UN, and a very senior American official was there, very senior. Okay. And not far away from them, standing there, right there, 10 feet away, were the Iranians. And he said to this person, he said, why don't you just go over there and talk to them? And the response was, why would I? Right. And that's the type of people we have in power. And then the last bit you bet about you'd mentioned the pagers, and certainly there are people who think that this is all like some time, even though the experience of all these wars, all these decades, we have so many people, not just folks on Twitter, not just average folks, but people in power in the political, military, media circles who seem like they know everything about war because they've read a few Tom Clancy novels, as opposed to actually learning and watching and understanding what we've been through for decades now. And was there another thing in there, Mike? I feel like there's another point you had in there at the end.
No, that pretty much had it. Thank you,
Yeah,
Matthew.
yeah. So like that's kind of it's troubling because this is what we're going up against. But we always have to remember that the empire is never going to put anyone into power who isn't going to reinforce the power of the empire. At best, you're going to get someone who's willing to only maintain it. But, this goes back to George Kennan in 1947 or whatever. Kennan says to Truman, the United States after World War II has 55% of the world's wealth. We've got less than 5% of the world's population. The purpose of every successive administration from here on now is going to be to maintain that imbalance. And, that's what the empire wants and needs, so.
There it is. So, let's see. Am I muted? No. Lenore Sanders,
Can I be heard okay?
just barely, but
Just-
go for it.
Okay, there's a couple of things I'll even show myself.
Hi, Lenore.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Very well, thanks. There's a couple of things. One is I want to thank Matt very, very much for your presentation and for saying the N-word, which is nuclear war, and the absolute danger that we're facing with that. There are people such as Pompeo who are still involved in various horrible things around this. It's a total fantasy for them, but unfortunately for humanity, it will not be. But what I actually wanted to talk about is that I have it written down just in case I stumble on this. Last night, I was on a Zoom meeting, which was supporters of two candidates in New York, both of whom are independent candidates, a young man who just turned 26 years old today, who's running for Congress in the Bronx, which is my hometown, and his colleague for the United States Senate. I'm bringing this up and because on that briefing, there was a very, very powerful and gut-wrenching presentation by a doctor whose name is Mark Perlmutter, who has run into battle scenes around the world, including 9/11, and has been trying to help with surgery and other things of that sort in Gaza. What he went through was just absolutely horrendous. He went through the details of the brutal murders, the brutal targeting of, in particular, children in that battlefield. And he also spoke about the targeting of medical professionals, the targeting of journalists so that people in the West cannot find out the truth of what's going on. I think if I remember correctly, he was taken off of Twitter or X or Facebook because he put on one of those sites, if not both, these very gruesome pictures of what was going on of these children, and they said that this was, whatever they said, because it doesn't matter. But anyway, he has, we need to get what he presented at this meeting out extremely widely. This coming Friday, the International Peace Coalition, which is having its 68th weekly consecutive meeting, is going to have at least portions of what he put out, and perhaps the doctor will be able to also be on that meeting. What I wanted to ask of you all, and I am very familiar with the horrors of the Vietnam War, and of the absolutely ingenious things that many of my fellow gray-haired people who were in uniform protesting that war, the ingenious things that you folks have done at that time to be able to get truth out. We need to get truth out very, very widely, very, very fast. And I guess my question is, what do you think the Veterans for Peace can do to be able to get this particular presentation out very widely? The Congress is closing its eyes to the reality. They're covering up their role in these murders, in this genocide. And we have to break this while we're also breaking the push for a war against Russia. That is, NATO's war. That's what we're looking at right now. So I hope that's clear. If there's any questions on what I said, please shoot them at me. But the main thing is, what can Veterans for Peace do to be able to get this out? Thank you.
Well, I'll jump in just before Matt does, because I'm going to put this on YouTube, and anybody who has their email in the chat, you'll get a copy. And so make sure you share. I will try to put the whole thing out, and if I have time, I'll edit into segments, because you know how the United States public is. If it can't fit on a bumper sticker, then they probably won't spend the time. But anyway, Matt, what else would you add?
Thanks, Lenore. Yeah, Dr. Perlmutter is absolutely amazing if people aren't familiar with him. And the point, Lenore, your point is correct. There is no more authoritative source in the world for this than Dr. Perlmutter. He has, for his entire adult life, been in these types of circumstances. The list of places he's been where he's responded to as a surgeon, it's as long as my arm. And he's also, just his qualifications, who he is. He's the president of the World Surgical Foundation, right? I mean, how is this man not authoritative enough to be on CNN or to have his op-ed printed by the New York Times or Washington Post, which, from my understanding, they won't do. Or at least with CNN, they cut a lot of his information out. They wouldn't allow him to say fully what he wanted to say. And this gets to the idea of why is that? And if you go back to the successful citizen movements of the 60s and the 70s into the early 80s, the Vietnam War, the civil rights, the environmental movement, certainly in the early 80s, the way the nuclear movement was moving along, and the way that the system, the establishment, the empire reacted to it evolved. And it said we need to do two things. One, we need to insulate our politicians from the reach of the public. And how we're going to do that, we're going to make it so that campaigns, the only thing that matters in campaigns is money, right? That's what's going to matter most. And this is why we see the Democrats in the sense of, look, that same poll I cited before from Cato, that poll shows, because they asked this question. They asked these voters in these three key swing states, would you be more likely or less likely to vote for Kamala Harris if she advocated for stopping arms or even just conditioning arms to Israel in order to get a ceasefire? And she clearly will gain more votes than she would lose in those states, right? The three most important states, than she would by continuing her current policies, her current statements. It just shows that Democrats are more interested in staying in the good graces of Israel and the pro-Israel lobby in the United States than actually winning the election in November. It shows you just how important that money is, because all these months later, 11 months later, their calculation still comes back to the money. That's the most important thing from them. And then the other aspect of it was media control, narrative management, right? So you can't have a guy like Dr. Mark Perlmutter on CNN and let him really talk. And you can only have him on one time. And then you got to get these goons from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, or for the Institute of Study of War, or the Center for New American Security, or whatever, all these retired generals and admirals who are on the payroll of Lockheed and Raytheon and Boeing. You got to get them back on. You got to have them on every hour. And then, because then if you have a Perlmutter on one time, his voice, his witness, his testimony is completely lost in the ocean of warmongering that's going on in those networks, right? So that media control, that narrative control. All right. So understanding that, how do we confront it? The money thing, I don't know. We all start buying Powerball, right? And Mega Millions, make a commitment to that, right? The money thing is really difficult because it's so obscene. It's so immense. All right. So that we now have to look at that asymmetrically. How do we go around that? And we've seen that in a sense where how the pro-Palestine movement, the uncommitted movement, they were able to organize and they were able to effectively get people to show up to the polls and then maintain that type of support, showing up in Chicago and causing this disruption. Right. So it comes back to, I think, organization and mobilization, effectively addressing the urgency of the matter and telling people how they can have an impact. Right. So it's that type of communication we have to be clear on to get people to move, why it matters to them and what they can do that will actually have an impact. I'm not an organizer by any means, so I'm able to say these things. I can't tell you how to do them. And then the other thing is with the media. We had and one more thing too, before I forget this, let me write this down, media. The other thing too is what VFP can do and all that. And so certainly organization, mobilization, that type of stuff, we understand. There's another aspect too, is morale. 10 years or so ago, Tulsi Gabbard was one of the few people who was standing up in Congress on the Democratic Party side against going to war in Syria, at least in that particular moment. And Michael McPherson, and Barry Ladendorf wrote a letter to her from VFP thanking her for her stance trying to keep us out of war in Syria. And the response that Gabbard had, both her and her staff, they were so appreciative of that. They said to me, this one letter, this means everything. I'm paraphrasing. This means everything to us. All the attacks we're getting, all the bombardment that we're under about this type of support keeps us going. So it's that type of moral support. It's that type of showing up and holding hands with people and being in solidarity with them. It's why, like when we see in Palestine, Eisenhower being murdered there. And why do the Palestinians keep asking people to show up? Because they need it. They need that solidarity. It's what keeps them going. I mean, their steadfastness, their samud, as they call it. Yeah, it's a rock. But they do need that solidarity from the outside because it's so hard what they're up against. The pressure, the stress, the inertia of the Leviathan is immense, right? So that we can do that. And then the third thing I would say with the media is we have to continue to build and strengthen independent media. We have to build it out. We have to provide money to it. We have to share it. We have to do all the things we can to help out all those independent and alternative journalists, media outfits, because what happens is YouTube gets corrupted. Twitter gets corrupted. I've noticed on my Twitter feed now, if I go to the search thing, where a couple of months ago I was still getting really good information on Gaza, on Palestine, on Israel. In the last couple of weeks, almost everything, when I open up the search thing on Twitter and it's talking about Israel and Palestine, the top 5 or 6 things that are being recommended to me, all those commentators, all those people posting on X or Twitter or whatever it is, all have little Israeli flags next to it. So it all gets co-opted. I remember years ago, like 10 years ago, I watched Lee Camp or Richard Wolff or Abby Martin or somebody like that on YouTube. And then, the video ends and another one just pops up and starts playing, and it'd be the same thing, right? It'd be, Lee Camp, it'd be same thing. And then one day I'm watching like Abby Martin and Rachel Maddow comes on after her, right? I'm watching Lee Camp and it's Sean Hannity that comes on next, right? I mean, like, so because the corporations, they say, hey, this YouTube thing, it's pretty good. People like it. They're watching it. We need to get involved. And then, of course, if you understand the elites, right, all the different elites within the empire, the media being one of them, the military industrial complex, the fossil fuels, the banks, et cetera, so on, right? Okay, in the last really 10 years, the newest partners, the newest members of that club of the elites within the empire, it's the tech people. It's the big tech people, right? I mean, so we have to understand that the big tech for which we have to do our independent and alternative media through is co-opted. They're complicit. They're part of the empire, right? So, okay, if we understand that, how then do we strengthen it? And again, I'm not a tech person. I know how to do this. Like I don't know what it would take to build out something that is feasible and effective and can sustain itself. That is an alternative to X, to Facebook. We've seen all those things pop up and they don't last. So what is there that's out there that's effective? But I will say this though, and I know I'm going on a long time here, but I will say this: there is a thing done by the effectiveness of the independent media and alternative media is clear, right? And the empire hates it, whether it's the politicians, whether it's the corporations, whether it's the media, they hate it because it's effective. And we know this because we've seen the results of it. When you have 55% of Americans saying that the U.S. military should not defend Israel, when all you have coming through our political leaders and through our corporate media is just straight Israeli talking points, yet 55% of Americans now say the U.S. military should not, right, defend Israel. I mean, the Intercept did a study back in April or so. And the Intercept found that if you get your news from podcasts, from YouTube, from print media, right, from those types of sources, you are much more likely to recognize that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. If you got your news from MSNBC, Fox, and CNN, you are much less likely to call it a genocide. Now, the most important thing in that study was a question that came on later, where they asked these people how likely they are to vote. And the only group that was more than not likely to vote were the people who watch CNN, Fox, and MSNBC. So as long as they have that media control there, as long as their politicians are insulated with money, and they're able to hammer on those who dissent, right, then they feel that they can keep the empire going, that we will have no effect. But we are having an effect because we see the way they're reacting to us, right? The way the assault on civil liberties, assault on free speech, that type of thing, the way that they're deplatforming people, censoring them, it's having an effect. The TikTok, if people didn't see, the TikTok legal proceedings in court started yesterday, right? The U.S. government wants to ban TikTok. Why? Well, because the American corporations aren't making as much money. Our intelligence services can't get into it the way that they can get into, the way that they basically are partners with Google and Apple and Microsoft and all the others, Meta. They don't like that. But the big reason, because we know this because there's little video evidence of this, Tony Blinken and Mitt Romney had this conversation 6 months or so ago on video. Many of you probably saw that, where they talked about it. We have this TikTok problem. People are getting too much information on TikTok. We got to shut it down, right? So I think if we understand the problems, we can find the solutions. And I know I'm good at pointing out the problems, not so good at maybe finding.
Well, it's good that you pointed out all those problems because it gave me some ideas and some good news. I forget who it was. A gentleman who was I think he was in the Navy, I'm not really sure, but a gentleman who was very, very active during the Vietnam War. He would not train, he was in the medical corps, and he would not train other doctors to go to Vietnam. And there was a mobilization to get some leaflets out to, I forget which military base it was. And they were brainstorming, how are we going to get these things out? To be able to motivate fellow soldiers not to go to protest this damn war. And so they didn't know they had 1,500 leaflets. Now, I would say leaflets, newspapers, etc., are better than the internet because they cannot be controlled, except for having FBI agents on your, writing their garbage. But anyway, that's another story. Anyway, so what happened? What happened was a couple of these guys, they drove up to the base. They still didn't know how they were going to get this out. And they saw some garbage flying around on the ground. And they saw a sergeant deploying some of the enlisted people to go pick up the garbage. So they got this idea. Well, what we have to do is we have to go into the base and sprinkle our leaflets all over the base so that it's not just one person picking them up, but different people in different portions of the base picking up these leaflets, because it appeared that this was just garbage that must have flown from somewhere. And in doing that ingenious thing, basically the entire base was abuzz on these leaflets against the war. So these kinds of, when I say, what can the Veterans for Peace do? I'm thinking of things like this. I'm thinking of Susan Schnall and her leaflet bombing.
Right.
And my friends at the Executive Intelligence Review now put out a daily newsletter. So there are things that people are doing that do not depend on the internet. And to the extent that we can strengthen presence, our ideas on the internet, fine. But we also, and this goes back to what you were, or I think you were saying, Matt, about, or responding to somebody else on how do we pull together the young people?
Mm-hmm.
Well, these kinds of really outrageous but really brilliant things are the way that you do that, I think. So anyway, if I can, Jim, what I'd like to do is I will send you my email, and if you can let other people know, that's fine. And also, if either you or somebody delegated can be on this coming Friday's International Peace Coalition, and that would be also wonderful, and be able to get that out to your colleagues. So thank you very much for your response, Matt.
Sure thing. All right, I'm gonna hold off on my hand, and I'm gonna go to Ron. So Ron, go for it. And then
hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
perfect.
Ron.
Well, I think in this last discussion, I think we kind of located where the power would come from to actually begin to affect this. Both, obviously, the student movement can't be the same it was last year, that we picked off and shut down. And it's got to pick up some of these bigger students and actually call out some of these financial layers, as they're beginning to do in terms of this investment. But I think one of the themes I've heard through this is this whole discussion of money and money making. And I think it's too simplistic a notion of the money, but rather look at the control of the money. And then we begin seeing where the flank would come from to defeat this bunch. Mm-hmm. In that people look at the BRICS and they look at the global South and all these moves for development now that they got a chance for independence and development. And we're manipulated to think that that's an operation against the United States, that it's directed against the dollar, when it's really in our own interest to get a US dollar back based in production ourselves. We don't have a US dollar. We've got a petrodollar, we've got a drug dollar, we've got a derivative dollar, but everything but a US dollar. So I think the nature of understanding a flank on your enemy is it's designed and it hits the enemy at a side of his thought that he doesn't even know exists. And that's how they're manipulating the United States, to be totally preoccupied in everything, looking at false enemies and whatever. And if people get a sense of the weakness of this international financial network that's running the weapons production, but they can also make money producing all kinds of goods that the world needs. So that shift to a swords to plowshares, I put a note in the briefing on this big Oasis plan that's been on the books for 4 or 5 decades now, to actually industrialize and irrigate the entire Middle East. But the point I want to get to, if we get to a understanding of that financial bubble, how that's the weakness, and we put through a reorganization of the control, both security and economic credits for development, the network of nation states, including a sane United States, would be part of the biggest economic boom ever as we remove this empire that's being run through the central banks like our Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. And so to bring a couple other voices into this, Ted Postal, who was on this International Peace Coalition last week, he, in starting his conversation, he said, Blinken is insane for pushing these long-range missiles. I think Scott Ritter just said that we almost died, or we could have died last Saturday. So I don't want in any way to kind of play down the danger of thermonuclear war. In fact, it's got to be really accelerated, and it's got to become the target, because the nature of this enemy is they're desperate to maintain their system. So everything we're looking at, various wars in terms of the proxy war in the Middle East, although it's got a history, it is a British proxy war. Same thing with Ukraine. And if we're looking at that level, you begin seeing the situation where the enemy has a lot of vulnerabilities. If we have a United States, a sane one, with Russia and China and the global South, building parallel with the BRICS, like I said, we get the biggest economic boom, and you begin closing down this operation from the top. Now, we can get the students excited about that. At the same time, we're putting together the structure from the top to run it. We can keep the narrative as we put it on the table, so that every time we bring somebody up, it doesn't have to disappear, but we've got to build that muscle, and we got to build it here in September. September is a lot more important right now than November. So I guess my question would be on this relationship with the BRICS and the United States not looking at it as a fearful operation, but actually allies to defeat this bigger enemy.
Well, we're fools if we don't look at it, if we don't take an approach where we're going to be involved in it, where we cooperate, where it doesn't become what it's being cited as, right? We're going to fulfill this destiny that it's going to become a de-dollarization project, which I agree. I don't think certainly the BRICS nations want to get out from the dollar. They want to get out from the American hegemony. But at the same time, too, I don't believe that these nations want to have a stranded, dying empire. What type of stability is that? What prospects for peace are that? These are, I believe, rather wise and level-headed and mature people in power who are building this BRICS. Certainly, they know the dangers of the American empire. That's why they're building it. They want to get. They also know it's a corrupt and rotten system. That's why they want to get away from it. And they see our actions, our criminal gangster actions. We've got a third of the world being sanctioned by the United States. So unilateral economic coercive measures, what in times past was called a blockade, an act of war. These are, it's illegal under international law, and it devastates people simply because they won't buy our weapons. So why wouldn't you try and get away from that? But the idea of doing it in a way, a punitive way to hurt the United States, I don't think that's their aim. Because a dying empire is incredibly dangerous. A dying empire with 1,600 nuclear warheads is an incredibly dangerous thing. The saying I like to say about this is a dying mule kicks hardest, right? And for us here in the United States, on the other side of this, Ryan, your explanation of it is totally correct. This is incredibly dangerous for us. We don't have industry here. We don't have production or manufacturing capacities here. For decades now, we have had policies of financialization. We have policies of a strong dollar, right? Because the dollar is everything. So we don't have to build anything. We can import it all because everything's cheap to us. And when you lose that world's reserve currency, you lose that strong dollar, you don't have an industry to build anything, and now your dollar plummets. How are your people going to buy anything? Right? I mean, so the economic consequences of this are existential, if you will, for the U.S. in the sense
Yeah,
of what would become of American society if you had that de-dollarization. How would America survive? What would America do in response to that? Because we don't have the capacity to build for ourselves, to manufacture for ourselves, right? We don't have that industry. And I don't see anyone in Washington who's going to reindustrialize the United States anytime soon.
well, just on that, I think there's all kinds of voices out here, a lot of them British now. But if you look at Pompeo, you look at John Bolton, you look at, Steve Bannon, all these, what are they saying? Or like, just saw where Bill Bonner is back in the picture. They're all saying that the United States is being fooled and falling to Putin's bluff, that he is really, they're playing and looking at his caution as cowardice.
Yeah.
And that we actually should move. And see, this is where everyone on this call and everybody in the country, when they see these guys coming out, we've got to call them out. We've got to, in various ways, call this irrationality out, because it's the only way we're going to free Trump up from some of this. We're going to, I don't know what we can do with the Democrats at this point. Robert Kennedy Jr., whatever people think about them as politicians, we as a movement have to change the subject, and they'll more and more the sane ones will reflect that. But when you see these voices, we really have to figure out, as Lenore was saying, ways we can take it on in front of people to actually play it up as the lunacy that it is. It's really insane, but they're believing their own lies as they think they can pull it off.
Right. And I wouldn't say that's restricted to those types that you were just talking about, the Bannon and others. I mean, that's the conventional wisdom in Washington, D.C. right now,
I agree.
is that we've called Putin's bluff. That's
Right.
that's the conventional wisdom. I think that's what people I've talked to and have heard from, this idea that the Pentagon were the ones who popped that bubble seems to be the case. That this past week they went into the White House and said, you got to stop listening to these people. Blinken, Sullivan, the others, they don't know what they're talking about. And this idea that we have pushed past Russia's red lines before, we called their bluff. Putin's not going to do anything. He's just a big bully. Don't you remember, Joe, when you were on the school ground as a kid, you had to stand up to bullies. That's what we got to do here, right? And I think the Pentagon came in and said, enough, Mr. President, you're risking nuclear war.
Well, that's hopeful. Thank God. So, well, Rachel.
Hey, Rachel.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. First of all, Matt, I owe you a big thank you for your amazing support for the speaking tour. Consecutive years, you provided us amazing videos, and that really opened eyes of the people in Japan.
Thank you.
And today, I'd like to bring 3 points. One is the conflict of interests among top executives, and the second is the media, and the third is the intelligence community. First, conflict of interest is even before Biden administration started, when he announced his executive staff, such as Anthony Blinken and Austin, I kind of predicted, or it's because I kind of anticipated what would have happened, and actually it's been like this because Anthony Blinken and together with other former Obama administration officials, he started consulting firm called the West Exec Advisors, and its clientele are warmongers, war profiteers, right? So the more, how do you say, even from the very starting point of 2020, when he went to China for the first time, he kind of started a fight against China. So why? There's no such a thing like a diplomacy by the State Department. They're kind of raising, conflicts. Then our Defense Department goes there and with, wielding weapons and, threatening them. So this is a kind of pattern of our nation. And I think think tanks. There are a lot of good think tanks and the bad think tanks, I would say, like the for how to say for the United States, we have what Rand Corporation, and for NATO nations, they have Atlantic Council.
Mhm.
So the kind of supporting war narratives to those nations. And when it comes to intelligence community, I didn't realize until this past years that under the Pentagon's umbrella, we have almost 20 intelligence agencies, right? Not only CIA and NSA, but there's so many more. Why do we need that many? And in order to keep those people, being employed, I think we have to organize more wars. In order to organize more wars, we need to control people's mind. In order to control people's mind, we have to control media, because media management is, like you said, is a narrative control. And in order to control narrative, in 2018, under the Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security, our nation created CISA, Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency, which is really bothering us because, should I say, recently, one of my posts on Facebook about APAC was deleted. But who makes that decision? I'm sure that was a personnel that was sent by our one of those intelligence communities to those SNS companies, right? So this kind of operation is, I think, it's very, very unconstitutional for us. And third point, yeah, and at the end of August, I was I helped the international conference of lawyers from all Asia Pacific regions. And Filipino lawyers were all saying that, they finally got rid of the U.S. military bases, but they came back again. Like they have 9 of them, and when it comes to these kind of geopolitical news reports, they always report on what the head of nations are saying, but they are not reporting the people of each nation. Like in Japan, its militarization is unbelievable, especially now southwestern region of Japan is like a really expansion of Japan as a huge fort. So the people over there are so scared and concerned about war against China, pollution of PFAS from military facility, as well as those semiconductor factories and stuff. Chaos. And their news media is completely controlled by U.S. media. It was very, very hard to make them understand that what's going on in Ukraine is a proxy war between U.S. and Russia, but they still don't see it. Russia is evil, China is evil. That kind of notion is all across the political spectrum in Japan. So what is your opinion on this conflict of interest still exists in our government, and they control a lot of things, including media and our own Pentagon agencies and such. I think it's all tangled with the so-called Mickey Mat that Ray said that. I think it's been all over like a spider's net. And how can we dismantle this nation of this huge interest, how to say, tangled interests?
Right. It's the best way to describe it, Rachel, is to quote George Carlin. It's one big club and you ain't in it. And that's essentially what we're looking at. We think that the elites are separate from one another, that they have their own agendas, and they do to a degree, but they're interlocked, and they all attend the same cocktail parties, and they go to each other's weddings. And I mean, I would recommend if people read The Power Elite by C. Wright Mills. He wrote it in 55 or 56. And his description, and he does what Mills does is surveys the American elite at the time. And this is the first years of the Cold War. And you read this book now, and it's as apt now as it was then. and, in Mill's depictions and understanding of who makes up this elite, but more importantly, how they understand each other and recognize their importance as an elite and how they must support one another, right? So you look at this, and some of it is clear in the sense that why is the military industrial complex so friendly with the fossil fuel corporations or the Pentagon? It's because the Pentagon is the biggest customer of ExxonMobil, right? Some of it's very transactional. You can see that. But then when you look at also too, how else are you going to maintain these relationships? How else are you going to expand your opportunities? How else are you going to make sure these other elites don't encroach upon your space as well as come to your defense? Well, this gets back to intermarriage between tribes, right? How do you make peace and do well with the people on the other side of the hill? You marry your daughter to their son, kind of thing. And you literally see that among the elites, like this idea that they marry one another. It really is the case. I mean, that's a gross oversimplification, but it actually does happen. So, I mean, understanding that, we understand why there is this type of revolving door, right? And it becomes a chicken and egg thing, which comes first. And it's just an exercise in trying to determine that doesn't really, I'll say that it's not going to be any better under a Harris administration or under a Trump administration. You brought up West Exec Advisors. You know who's at West Exec Advisors right now? Michelle Flournoy. Michelle Flournoy will most likely be Kamala Harris's defense secretary. I mean, so even though you would expect if a Harris administration, a changing of the guard at the top levels, you're going to get the same people, right? Here are the new folks, same as the old folks. With regards to why isn't diplomacy prioritized more or even have a voice? Well, the empire is always at war, Rachel. There's no time for diplomacy. We're at war. You want to talk to these people? They're our enemy. You're as bad as they are, right? So it's just that mindset that this is why diplomacy cannot exist in our empire. Not since World War II can it exist. And if it does exist the way it is, our diplomats are more militaristic than our military folks are. Look at this century's secretaries of state. The most diplomatic of all of them was the former General Colin Powell. Right? And after that, who's the second most diplomatic of all that? John Kerry probably, right? God help us, right? Then you look at the others though. You've got Rice, you've got Clinton, you've got Tillerson, you've got Pompeo, and now you have Blinken. I mean, I mean, this is like arguing about arguing about diplomacy among those guys is like arguing about virtue in a whorehouse, so to speak, right? I mean, sorry for the frank language there, but that's what we're dealing with here. So this idea that we're going to have anything that's not incestual in our power elite is disproved by examination of it as well as the historical record. Now, the question you come back to is, that's great, Matt. Thanks for your analysis. Terrific. You're another guy who pointed out the problems. What are we going to do about it? And, this is the idea is, okay, well, how do we disrupt it? How do we make it so they have to take us on? They have to adjust. We're seeing the pressure coming from the outside, as Ron brought up, with BRICS and the potential for de-dollarization and all that type of stuff. But also, too, internally, how do we disrupt them? How do we make it uncomfortable for them? How do they lose power? Because unlike, say, Benjamin Netanyahu, who genocidal war criminal, right? But he actually has an ideology and a belief system that he ascribes to. If you talk to Netanyahu, he believes in Zionism. He believes in achieving greater Israel. Okay, he really does believe that. Now, and actually, I remember what someone said before about Netanyahu and how do we get him out. We can go into that later too if people want. But our people here, they don't have that. For our people here, whether they're Republican or Democrats, the means are the ends. Power is what they want. The seat that they are in or that they aspire to is all that matters to them. None of these people are ideologues in any true sense of the word, right? There are fools, there are knaves. Don't get me wrong. There are true believers in Washington, D.C., but on the bulk of it, the people that we have to move, the people we have to impact. Power is what, and so how do we disrupt it? And to go back to Lenore talking about Jose Vega and Diane Sarr, I saw someone on here wearing a Jill Stein t-shirt. This is a 501c3 organization, so I'm not going to promote anything, but I will say that if you want to disrupt power, you have to support alternatives and those independent and third-party voices that are going to disrupt the status quo that exists. Otherwise, you will get no response. So, okay, knowing that, how do we then disrupt? Okay, and that's something, a more political question for, maybe a different time. But yeah, I mean, all your points well taken, Rachel. It's infuriating to sit here and see what we're seeing. It would be bad enough if it wasn't tied to the organized murder, to the genocide, to the destruction of whole peoples. Right? It'd be bad enough if it wasn't even that, if it was just the corruption of it. That'd be bad enough. But the reality is, of course, is what we see, whether it be in Palestine, whether it be what we see in Ukraine, whether it be what we see in Congo, and what may come. What we have seen, of course, from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, etc. Yeah, people of Southeast Asia, as we all know, their kids are still being born with deformities. They're still having stillborn babies because of our Agent Orange programs, right? I mean, so knowing all that, okay, how do we disrupt it and make it bend? And it's a challenging thing.
Yes, it is. And the media has to report the reality, like you mentioned about Afghanistan. But before that, we lost Vietnam, then Afghanistan. And still, if we believe that we can win Russia, Iran, and China, we must be stupid, right? And right now, even at what do you say, the Yemen Houthis have been blocking the fleet from UK and the United States. I'm sure the Seventh Fleet in Yokosuka must be really freaking out for the oncoming war with China. They won't be able to win against China. And also, like Niger, they kicked out the French military, French embassy, as well as the U.S. military, right? And we can't do anything about Niger. Of course, we're too busy with many other major wars. So knowing that, there's absolutely no point to spending so much money. As everybody knows here, that we spend the world's biggest military budget, which is exceeding from the world's second all the way through the 11th. Right? And from the world, the 6th through 11th are our allies. So this is way too much military budget. And Russia spends only 1/10 of our military, and still they are winning.
Yeah, I
Right?
think it's now up to like 1/8 or something like that now.
Okay.
but yeah, exactly. Right. The mindset within the empire is that, okay, if we can't be the unipolar power, we'll go back to what we had in the Cold War. And we see where they have been successful in growing, in solidifying their power on the Western world, right? So you mentioned Japan. We see Korea, Philippines, other places. Look at what has happened in Scandinavia. I mean, it's just amazing. It's horrifying, but it's amazing how public opinion in Sweden and Finland turned so quickly to wanting to be in NATO. I mean, it is remarkable the job that they did in Finland and in Sweden to get those nations to be proud, chest-thumping members of NATO. It's absolutely incredible how quickly they did it, how effectively they did it. So, I mean, I think a lot of times we have in our head that the empire is a dying beast, which it is. It's lumbering, it's outdated, etc. But they're working very hard to maintain it and grow it. And I think for many of them, the idea of us falling back into a multipolar world is something that we can. They're not going to collapse. They're not going to just give up because they don't want to give up their hegemony, but it'll be hegemony with more subordinate parts to it, right? And you could see where they're putting the emphasis on, and then the battlegrounds will be those places as they were during the Cold War. It'll be Africa, it will be throughout Asia, etc., but particularly Africa.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks everybody who asked questions. Matt, this has been extraordinary. And of course, we didn't get nearly done. But for those of you who want a copy of this, make sure your email is in the chat. Make sure your email is in the chat. And I will send this out over the next couple of days. It'll be a link to YouTube or Rumble. It's part of the ever-growing independent media. So share, share, share. So Matt, before we go, any last words to sum up, and then we'll let you go. I mean, I'm looking at, like somebody mentioned, all the gray hair here. I mean, it's bedtime. So
well, thank you everyone for attending and enjoyed the conversation. It's tough what we're up against, but what's the alternative? And if we're not successful, at least we go down swinging. And I'll bring up the point I made before about people around the world need us to stand in solidarity with them. One of the most touching things I've heard this last year was at a rally here in Raleigh for Palestine. One of the speakers who has contacts with the resistance in Palestine said, "We are here because this is what the resistance wants and needs us to do." And so to be in solidarity with the people who are not, as my very good friend Rahanga Masri said this weekend to a member of the Democratic Party who's endorsing Kamala Harris, who is Palestinian herself, our people are not raising the white flag of surrender, yet you here are accepting the crumbs of power. We're not going to do that. That's not who we are. And so we keep moving forward. We keep moving forward together. Ray McGovern said to me one time, "Matt, we might not accomplish anything, but at least we're accomplishing nothing with some really good people." So there's at least that. We're all, this is a good company to be in, right? So anyway, but I appreciate this. Thank you for what you're doing. And just keep on it again, because at least we go down swinging.
go down swinging. Perfect. Great way to end. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. Take care.